Hello everyone and welcome to this introductory tutorial on QGIS, QGIS on 101, whatever you want to call it, but I'm happy you're here. My name is Matt Forrest, and today I'm going to be taking you through this GIS software, QGIS. So QGIS is an open source toolkit. That means it's free and open to use, and this tutorial is meant for the absolute beginner, or even if you use QGIS before, I think you can pick up a few new things that you can use in your analysis. So even if you've never performed GIS before, or any spatial analysis, or touched software like this, no worries, we're going to cover everything from the actual basics, getting installed and set up, and then producing some of your own maps, doing everything from analyzing elevation data, looking at different data from parks and different locations, doing some very basic spatial analysis. So you get the full overview of what you can do with this really amazing software. So I'm really excited to get started, so let's go ahead and jump in. So let's go ahead and jump into our first section, and we're going to talk about why you want to use QGIS, a little bit behind the project, and then how to download the software and go ahead and get started. The primary reason people want to use QGIS is that it is free and open source software, which means that it is free, of course, that you can use and download. So there's nothing you have to pay to actually use the software. And it's open source, meaning the code and the contributions behind it are open and available to the public to see and contribute, as long as you follow the contribution rules and things like that. So as you can kind of see here on the website, it talks about how people are contributing from literally all over the globe. They have for years. There's different ways to support it. And then there's a number of different people that back the project, companies and things like that that actually support it through their money, basically. So that's how they kind of do that. So there's different ways to, if you want to check it out and get involved here. This is the website, so there's some different tabs you can click here to learn a little bit about what QGIS is. There's different guides for users, so if you want to take it a little bit further from this, you can actually check out some of the training materials support. There's also user groups, so there's people all over the world that kind of organize these user groups, which is really cool as well. If you want to get involved in the project, there's different ways to do that with testing or mailing or documentation or things like that. And then here's all of the documentation that you need. Now you need to know your version number to get the right documentation, but a lot of the key concepts that we're talking about here will carry over to future versions, but the other things that you can check here are what has changed and stuff like that. So that's the basics of the QGIS website. Now as you see here, there's lots of different versions of QGIS, and it's constantly developing, and people are adding a lot to the system, not only through the core software, but the large ecosystem of plugins that you can actually use to extend the software quite a bit. And we'll talk about those later in the course as well. But there's so much you can do with this. It's just really crazy how it's gone from when I started using it right about when it came out to now. It's just grown and exploded. It's amazing to see what it's done. The other great thing is that it's cross-platform, so you can use it on a Mac like I'm using here, on Windows, on Linux, so you can pretty much use it anywhere, and it's also open source, so you can kind of deploy it in cloud environments and different places like that. So it's really, easy to kind of scale and use and grow as you need to use it from that perspective. So a quick history, QGIS started in 2008. I think this is one of the original guides, A Gentle Introduction to GIS. This one's from 2009, but you can kind of check this out. This is, some of the early days of QGIS and how people got started. You can see some of the original views of QGIS here, Quantum GIS as it was called, 1.0.0. So one of the original versions here, but really cool to see it's gone from this in 2008. I started using it in 2010 when I graduated, and it's just really grown into this really amazing ecosystem. So QGIS really focuses on providing tools for both the introductory user, if you're using GIS software for the first time, and if you need to learn it from the base, from the ground up, as it were. QGIS is the perfect place to start with that. It's very easy to adapt to and learn, especially if you're familiar with desktop software, and then some basic GIS concepts with that, all the way up to really advanced use cases. I mean, people have used this to create really complex projects and things on the web. I've seen, trajectory data being used and all kinds of stuff. There's scripting for Python and different integrations all over the place. So it's not just like you can use it and then you reach a certain level and you can't anymore. You can scale it and use it with different projects as well. On top of that, it integrates with a lot of other open source softwares. So things like PostGIS, you can plug in and use that data. There's other data connectors, and it's completely open. So as it grows and evolves, it just kind of keeps growing and moving from there. So the license of the software is under the Creative Commons 4.0 license. That means that it's free to distribute and change and modify under certain conditions. If you want to get more into that, you can check out the website here and get more specifics on the licensing and stuff like that. And that gives you some more detail on, kind of how you can use it and what bounds you can use it within. But for the most part, it's open source software, which is really great. So now that we've covered a little bit about the project, let's go ahead and download a new version. So I just downloaded this as of the time I'm recording this in January 2024. The current version is 3.34 Princeton, and you can basically download that here. So when you hit download, it should bring you to the right version for your operating system. If you need to go to Windows, or if you need to go to Linux, or any other sort of open operating system, you can do those here. So all you have to do is click download. That's going to download a zip file onto your machine, and then you should be walked through the installation steps from there. Pretty simple to do. I just downloaded mine here, and this is what pops up when it opens up. So on my computer, this is what happens. It's just going to ask you to basically drag this into your applications folder, at least on a Mac. And once you've done that, it'll ask you if you want to keep both the previous version, if you have a previous version, or just install the new version. You should just overwrite the new version and go from there. So that's pretty much it for Macintosh. They'll include some other instructions if you need them for Windows. But if you do need any issues or run into any roadblocks here, there's great sort of instructions here on how to download this for your different operating system. So depending on your computer and security settings and things like that, you may get a message that it can't open it because it's not from a verified developer. At least on Mac, that's basically, it means it didn't come directly from the App Store. So you can get around that. You have to go into settings, then security, and then actually look into there, and it'll say that your computer tried to open QGIS and it wasn't able to. So go ahead and say it's okay to open that, as long as that's okay with you, being it your computer or your work computer. The software is very stable, so there's no issues or anything like that. And then you should see this pop up. So basically we have our new version of QGIS that's going to open up, and here is the opening page of QGIS. When you open it up, you'll see some different news and things like that. So some basic stuff here. We'll talk about what that is in a minute. So if you want to click on the news, you can open that up and pass to that. But for now, we're just going to close this out and move this over. So let's go ahead and start with a quick tour of what is on the QGIS interface, where things are, and what you can use from there. Okay, so now that we've downloaded and installed QGIS, we can go ahead and take a look at the actual application interface and start to navigate our way around it a little bit. So the first thing you always want to do is start a new project. So you can do that here by going to Project and New, or you can just double click here. That should open up a new project for you to get started with. Now, before we jump in, we'll walk through the interface so you can kind of acclimate yourself to where things are in the application. Of course, this might look a little bit different if you're on Windows versus Mac versus Linux or anything like that, but for the most part, everything pretty much remains the same. So the first thing I'm going to point out is the layers list, and this will start to pop up when we add data to the map, but that's down here in this lower left corner, as you can see here. This includes all the layers that you're going to list. You can change the order, remove them, do some filtering, change visibility and things like that, and you can also control them from the individual layer itself. So that's the first place is where you're going to look, is you're going to see all these different layers in the map that's there. The other thing that you can look at is up here, and this is your file browser. These are all your available data sources that you might want to start to use and pull within the map. So as you can see here, I have my Macintosh system. I can see where all my data is here. I can also go and see that here. So this is my home drive, which is just the higher level of that. There's different volumes, then you can actually create some favorites here if you want to store those. So let's go ahead and add a new favorite in here. I'm going to go in here to Mac HD, I'm going to go to Mac, Documents, and then I have a folder in here called QGIS Tutorial. I can go ahead and add that as a favorite, and now we can get right back to that whenever we want. You'll also see some different options for things like a geopackage file. If you have Postgres or Spatial connected, those are database options that you can connect. And you can see a bunch of others here too. There's web mapping services, XYZ tiles, all these different things, including ArcGIS REST servers. If you want to find some data that's in an open data portal that happens to be backed by Esri, you can actually pull those in here and go ahead and add those. So we'll cover how to add these in a minute, but for right now, we'll just add our favorites here, and this is where we'll be pulling in all our data for the tutorial. If you want the data, you can either follow along. I have all the links, so if you want up-to-date data, you can use that. If not, you can just download what we have here and use that. So this big blank white area here is the map canvas. Now this is where the map will eventually show up, and you'll start to see that here. A few things to note as you move the map around. You can see the coordinate system down at the bottom right here. As I move my cursor, you'll start to see where that is, and ultimately this is centered around 0, 0 or somewhere nearby. And then you can see the scale here. Now you can automatically adjust this, or as you zoom in and out, you can use your mouse scroll or something like that to do that. There's also the magnification if you want to zoom in with the magnifier and rotate the map, things like that. And you can also turn off the rendering if you want it to not render every time you change the zoom. You can do that. So that's helpful if it starts on like a really high level view, like the entire nation or the world, and you want to zoom into maybe like a state level or a city level. Turn it off and then just turn it back on when you need to render it again. Otherwise, it might like freeze up and do things like that. All your projections are managed here. So this is for the project projection. You can see all the available projections in here, and you can see where those look like. And then you can also change these. This will basically show you the ones they've reused recently. So out of the box, it probably will only have a few, but you can go ahead and manage those from the project setting here. And there's a bunch of other kind of settings that you can see here, which we'll get into later. Now, up at the top, this is what we'll call the toolbar. These are a bunch of different preset options that you can include to actually work with the map. So some of your basic ones are your file options if you want a new project to open, save, do things like that. You can start a print layout, your zoom, pan, zooming options here. There's some like zooming history if you want to zoom to the last thing or before. Creating a new map view within the map canvas is something you can do. There's bookmarks, spatially bookmarks if you think of it that way. The identify features, which we'll be using quite a bit. You can actually click on something on the map and see something about it. There's some other spatial tools here for creating new geometries. So if you want to create a layer, we'll be doing that a little bit just to kind of see what's on the map and changing it from that perspective. And then there's just some related plugin things here that you can actually do. So there's a lot here, especially when you're editing features. All these should start to open up. But just keep in mind everything up here is changeable. If you want to add something to the toolbar, you just right click over here. And if there's any of these things that you want to add in, it's very easy just to toggle those on and off and select them. So let's say we want to add the raster toolbar, we can certainly do that here. If you want to turn that back off, you can turn it off there. So it's really your like bookmarks or something like that in this top toolbar that you want to access quite a bit. So keep in mind customizable, you can change it to whatever settings you want. And then on the top here, you can see that there's the different menus. So this is a lot of the same things that you could put into the toolbar, but you can access them. There's settings, you can manage your plugins, there's vector tools, raster tools, database tools, all these different things that you can actually start to build out. Now, if you don't know where something is, you can always try typing in help. Otherwise, throughout the course, we may use ChatGPT just to ask a quick question, because all of that documentation and information that's out there already, GPT has already taken a look at and indexed. So that's a really good place to say, hey, I'm trying to do this thing. What should I do? Now, there's one other menu I want to show you, and that is the processing toolbox. When I open that, that's going to open up to the right here. And this has a lot of the analysis tools that you'll be using in QGIS over here. So as you can see here, you can see which ones you've used recently, and then actually look through and see if there's doing network analysis, or if you want to interact with different layers and things like that. File sort of creation tools and different things from, you can do GDAL operations and GRASS operations here as well. So there's a lot in here. I would take the whole section to go through all these different things. But let's say you just want to do raster type of operations. You can type that in, you can see what you can actually start to get. So there's all of these different options, lots of things we can actually do here. And that's really cool to check out. So all great tools if you want to look at these different things. If you want to go raster to vector, then you can see what that actually looks like here. So that's the very quick overview of everything in the layout of QGIS. You can see you have your different components up on the four kind of corners of the application interface and your menus here. So our next job is to really start adding some data to the map. So let's jump into the next section. We'll put some data on the map. We'll show you how to get data, what data you should be looking for, and everything like that. So now we're going to grab some data to put on our map. I'm going to be using the New York City Open Data Portal for a couple of reasons. One, I live here, so I know what's there. Two is that a lot of people kind of generally know things in New York City. We're going to be taking a look at Central Park today. I think most people kind of know what Central Park is, and that may make it easier to interact with. And then third is that there's just a ton of data here. There's so much that we could pull in, and you might want to go out and explore and see things like that. But it's a great place to get started. So So it's pretty easy to like actually open up a search. Let's say we just want to look for trees. There's a pretty famous New York City tree census data set. I can search that here, and then you can actually see the results of the individual tree census here. So what you can do to see like map related data is you can actually filter this to map, and then it will just show you the results for map and the keyword trees. If you just want to search all things map, you can just delete your text query here, and then it'll show you everything. So there's 342 different layers of data for you to play around with here. Some of them are small data sets, a few points or polygons. Some of them are really massive, and we'll talk about the scale of those. So like I said, we're going to be taking a look at Central Park and some of the other parks in New York City. So we'll go to this layer here. This is the Parks Properties map. These are all the things that the New York City Parks Department actually owns and operates. So you see you have your small parks of the city, your giant ones like Central Park, others out in Queens and in Brooklyn and things like that. So this is the data that we want to pull in. So how do we actually get this data out and into our map? Let's take a look right over here. So how do we actually get to this data? Now you can actually click this export button up here, and we only have a few options that are really non-spatial. The CSV might include the polygons in them, but it's a little bit tricky. So one thing we want to look for in this map, and this portal has changed a little bit, is this little button right here. So you can view the source data set. That's sort of the map view of that data set. And now this is the full data set, as you can see here. You can actually play with some of this data in this interface, or we want to go to export here, and we want to download this file. So there's a few options for spatial specific data. There's KML, KMZ, shapefile, and GeoJSON. Now, KML and KMZ are specific to the Google Earth interface. They will work in QGIS. They just sometimes have some extra properties that we may not want. So I'd encourage you to look at shapefile or GeoJSON. Now, shapefile will actually download as a zip file and will include at least four or more files with it that has information about the projection and the data and all those other pieces. So it can get like a little bit confusing because it's a zip file, but you only need the .shp to open it, but you need the other files to read it. It's kind of it's one of those older formats that's just been used forever. But I like the GeoJSON option. It's a single file. You don't really have to do anything else with it. So we're going to go ahead and select that and hit download. And that's going to download here so we can see that we have this data. And I'm just going to move it into that folder, and then we'll jump back into QGIS. So you can do the same on your end, take that file you downloaded and put it in whatever source folder you're using on your side. Okay, so I've added my data in. I'm ready to go, and I can actually go here and open this up. And you can see now that I have this specific layer here. It's reading that in. It's saying that it's the Park Properties CSV, and I can do a few things that I actually want to do. We'll add the layer to project. You can right-click on it that way and do that, or you can just drag and drop it into this layer space. So once we do that, it will add to the map, and we should start to see our data populate. So this is the data that we want to see. We've added it to the map. We can see it just looks like the other data there, and that's the first step, is kind of adding layers to the map. That's really how it works, is you download a file, put it in a location you want, then add it to the map, and you're ready to go. So that gives us that first layer that we can actually play around with. So now you can see as I move the map around, it's starting to change. You'll see this status bar of it recalculating. I can zoom in and see the layers at a more granular level here. You can see this is like a strip of parks along Park Avenue, I believe this is. And you can kind of see some of these different things from this perspective. So you can see this start to change and move around a little bit. I should note that you can also add layers here. If you want to add different layers from this menu, you can certainly do that, but this gives you the starting point. Now, if you want to see what each of these elements are, we're going to click on this little icon with the eye up here. That's our tool to look at the feature selection. So now you can see my mouse has changed. I have my little eye, and I can actually click on that. When I do, now that I moved myself out of the way, we can actually see what we have here. So this is the properties of that data set. You can see that there's a jurisdiction. Is it mapped? What's the zip code it's in? All this different information. You get a URL link to the actual park site. Here's obviously the name. We know Central Park. Is it a category? It's a flagship park. Where it runs to, all of these different information about this individual park. So we can keep moving around and looking at other parks as well. If you want to click down here, it should be Washington Square Park. You can get the streets, once again, all this other information about that. So really, when we look at map data, there's two components to that. First, there is the geometry, actually where it exists. Like I mentioned earlier, there's points, lines, and polygons. These are our polygon data sets. So that's the actual, where this thing is, the geometry, the place that it is representing on the map. And then you have all your other data here that basically represents the the tabular data that's associated with that thing. So that can be anything from a string, like text fields. It can be numeric. It can be a URL. It can be anything we kind of want to put in there. So there's a lot you can actually do with that. So to get out of this view, you actually have to change this mouse. You want to go back to the hand over here, which will allow you to move the map around, and you can close this out if you're done with looking at the features from that side. If we jump back here, I picked out a few different layers. Like I said, you can download these from the links if you want to. Those are our original parks data set here. These are playground areas if you want to use those. So this is a data set of like playground areas. We'll go ahead and export this, and you can see here we'll get the GeoJSON view. Let's go ahead and do that again. So this layer is the NYC Parks Forever Wild map. These are ecologically important natural resources within the parks. These are very kind of protected areas within the park. We can go ahead and do our double export here, open that up, and then hit export in GeoJSON once again. There we go. We also have our park permits area. These are areas where you can actually set up an event within the park. So if you want to register an event, we can go ahead and export that as well. And then these are our bike routes that go through the actual park and actually all over the city. So what we can do here, go ahead, we'll export those as GeoJSON. And then the last one, which I think is just probably one of the strangest data sets I've come across for NYC Open Data, is the squirrel census, where they actually go and count squirrels where they're seen in the park. And this one actually tracks their fur color. Okay, so now that I have those layers, what we can do, I'm going to move those from my downloads folder into my folder. You can go ahead and do the same, and then we'll revisit that in a minute. We'll jump back over to Q and start adding layers to the map. Okay, so as you can see here, I've added my new layers in. I can see those in my favorites folder here, and we can just start to add those in. So we have our properties. Let's go ahead and add those play areas on top of the map here. So now you can see those play areas are popping up in the map. They're quite small, but you should be able to see them there. We'll also add in our squirrel census here to see where squirrels have been seen throughout the park. And then we'll also add in our bike routes and then our forever wild areas. So now we have multiple layers on the map. You can start to see where things are showing up. You can start to see a little basic information like a street grid. Of course, you can't see everything here. You would have to go and download tons of layers to create a map and actually see this. So we're going to do two things here. So the first thing is we're going to add a plugin. It's the most popular plugin in QGIS, so people use it all the time. It's called Quick Map Services, which basically allows you to add a base map underneath this so you don't have to add all those other contextual layers to the map. And the second is we're going to change the projection so it looks a little bit different. You'll see why as we add those in. But we'll touch more on plugins later in the course. But first, let's go ahead and manage and install plugins. You can do that right up here. And this will open this up and you'll see all of the different plugins that you can have available. So there's lots and lots and lots. There's a lot to go through here. So we'll talk about some of the top most popular ones later on. But for right now, we just want that quick map services. So you can start typing that in. Map services. As you can see, I've had this enabled on my computer already in QGIS. If you've installed it already, which you can do, you may need to upgrade it. So I'll go ahead and upgrade my plugin. If not, you'll just have to add it and then it will be installed. To make sure it's installed, you just have to click here and you'll see, yes, I have installed my quick map services and I'm ready to go from there. So before we go any further, let's go ahead and actually save our map. So we can do that up here. We'll hit save. Let's go ahead and put that in our folder. So I'll go to Documents, I'll go to QGIS Tutorial. This will save as a QGZ, basically a QGIS file type, and you can go ahead and hit save, and then you'll see that up here. If you do see that little star at the top, that means your work is unsaved, so you want to be periodically going through and hitting the save button just so you make sure you don't lose anything. So after I installed that plugin, for some reason, I had to restart QGIS. It maybe works that we just needed a quick restart because I couldn't find the plugin. That may or may not happen to you, so just be aware that that's something you might have to do. I'm going to go ahead and open up the project. You'll see here it's under your recent projects, so it shouldn't be going anywhere, and you've saved that. And then to find the plugin, when plugins are installed, they go into various parts of the menu. What I want to do here is you can start typing for Quick Map Services, and you can see that's over here under Web is where that lives. But it may or may not have actually added it here as well, so you can add a Quick Map service. You can see some of the different options we have here. There's NASA layers as well as OpenStreetMap. We're just going to add the OpenStreetMap standard service. And as you can see now, we have the complete OpenStreetMap base map here, which shows everything from roads and locations and things like that. but you'll see the text looks kind of funky, and that's because of the projection that we're working in. So most web maps use the Web Mercator map projection. That is the EPSG code 3857. And you can see here we're in 4326. So we can quickly fix that. This is the project setting, remember? And we'll go here and change the projection for the project. If you don't see it under recent, you can go ahead and search that, but we'll go ahead and hit OK. And to check that the work looks good, we hit apply. We'll hit OK, and now everything looks great. Now you can change your projections based on if you need specific projections, either for a print layout or for measurements or anything like that. They're basically all there, so you should be able to use them, but at least this gets us started to keep it accurate to the base map so it's readable and legible for what we want to do. Now, it's not the best projection. There's lots of different topics on that, but that's a story for another day. We'll keep pressing on from here. Now, just a quick overview of the layers that we have on the map. As you can see here, this is the order that these will be rendered in. So for some reason, I want to put this OSM layer on the top. You'll see nothing else below it because everything else is rendered underneath that layer. If I wanted to toggle a layer on and off, I can do that here, and you'll see it'll go to italics. The checkbox won't show up, and you can see that those areas are now off of the map. Now, if you want to reorder these, it's pretty simple. You can just drag and drop them to reorder them, or you can use this. You can hover over that and use the up and down arrows here to move those up or down, and that'll move that layer to where you want it as well. And then that's basically what we have here. There's some filtering controls for legends and things like that here. But for the most part, that's the pieces that we have here in this Legends toolkit. So that allows us to change the map layers, turn them on and off, and things like that. So we'll be going back and forth to do that a few different times, but now you have the basics down and how to manage your layers within the map interface. So if you want to take a look at other projections, we can take a look. They're all here from different ones that you can select and use. Lots of different options as we can look at all the different ones available here. So if you want to just take a look, let's change the project to, I don't know, something really strange. We can go ahead and use this. We'll hit apply, and then our map will probably look very weird, which it does here. So it's easy to change, and that underlying layer will change as well. You can just kind of keep playing with these as you see fit. If you want to go into different projections that you need, that's totally doable. It might prompt you to use sort of like a translation here, so you can choose which one you want. And then you can see how those update here. So we'll go ahead and change that back, and we're back to where we originally were. So projections are all there. Projections are a big topic. Don't have time to go into that in this tutorial, but if you want to learn more, there's a couple other videos that I can reference that you can take a look at. Okay, so let's jump back into the tutorial here. I want to run through a few different components of the map navigation. We went through a few of them down here, which allows you to, pan and zoom the map. This is my scroll wheel zoom that I'm zooming in and out. You can also use, command plus and minus that will zoom you at different levels. But there's a few other things that you can do here too. So you can actually manually enter a coordinate if you want to go to there. If you want to, you can copy the coordinates. So it's pretty easy to do that. So I'll just copy these coordinates, and then I can delete those in and then move the map to that position. You can also set the scale manually here. So if I wanted to do 1 to 100,000, if I want to do 1 to 1,000, you can zoom at those different levels and change it that way. There's also some magnifying here that you can do that will adjust the scale over here as you see. And then you can also change the rotation. So if I wanted to change this 180 degrees, that's going to basically flip it on its head and change it there. But we'll go back to 0 and keep it the way we had it before. There's a few other things you can do if there's specific needs you have, like you need some preset zoom levels or anything like that. You can also do those here. But I can include some links to help you walk through those, but we won't go too much into detail for those because those are pretty specific for some different processing or print needs that you might have. So the next step we want to do is actually symbolize some of the data on the map. Now we've just used preset colors as they come in for these different things here. So we can actually go ahead and change those based off of the data. So the first thing we want to do is open up what's known as the styling menu, and there's a few other pieces in there. So to open the menu to style the items on the map, you can just double click on the layer you want to edit, and that's going to open up some different pieces here. So this is going to open the attributes table, but if you go all the way up here, you can control feature symbology, and that's the menu we want to focus on right now. So as you can see here, we just have this simple marker that's basically just going to style it as is. You can go ahead and change the color and do things like that. So we'll go ahead and hit OK and apply, and you'll see underneath the map we've changed all those points to purple. There's also some iconography that you can use here. So if you want to look in here for different icons, you can use those. Say these were hospital locations, we can do that, and then all those points will show up as such. But what we want to do is probably a few different other things to style some of the map based off of data that is in our data set. So let's take a look at a few of those options. So the first option we have is categorized, as you see here. That's going to color the data or style it based off of a categorical value in our data set. And we have some of that in this data. What you can see here is that we have primary fur color. So what we can do is we can select that. And what will happen is we can basically hit classify, and that's going to add all the values. So there's really 3 values: black, cinnamon, and gray. You can edit each of these individually. So if I wanted to change this to match that color, I can do that. We'll do like a light brown color here. See what we can come up with. We'll go with that for now. And then for gray, we can just do a nice gray color here. So let's go ahead and do that. So once we hit OK, what you can do is you can continue to add styles manually here. If you want to hit plus or minus, you can delete all. And there's also some different things you can have here: symbol levels. You can change it based on data definitions and all these pieces. But let's go ahead and hit apply, and you'll see a few things have happened here. First, you'll see within the map, there's the actual legend here, and you can turn these off individually now. So if we just wanted to look at gray scrolls, we can see where those are. If we just want to look at the brown scrolls, we can see where those are, and so on and so forth. So it kind of gives you some additional layering control after you've styled them out. And then as we zoom in here, you can see that all of these are individually placed on the map and actually styled based on the parameters that we put in. So that's really great. Now, if you wanted to change the size of this, you can also change the size of the symbol. Maybe we want to make it a little bit bigger. Let's make it 2 times bigger at number 4. We can hit OK here, and then maybe you can also change the opacity as well. If you want to make it partially see-through, you can also remove the stroke. So you have all of these styling options here as you start to play around with these different things as well. You can even do rotation here, and then I think there's even rotation based off of data in the map itself. So if you have some sort of angle or an arrow pointing that, and you have that in your data set, you can actually turn that symbol to face a specific way that you want to, which is pretty cool. So we'll go ahead and use that. Let's see here now is our opaque symbols. You'll see those showing up on the map, and you can kind of see this gives us a nice little overlap kind of view here. And then if you hit OK, you'll see how that changes as we zoom in and zoom out. Okay, so now that we have categorized our data using some text-based data in our data sets, the next thing we want to do is visualize some numeric data. And to do that, we actually need to download a new data set. So I'm going to head back over here to the New York City Open Data Portal, and this is the data that I want to download. It's the 2015 New York City tree census, which looks at some different information about the tree, different factors about it, the species, things like that. So that's what we're going to do, but we don't actually want to download all of the data. It's quite a large data set. As you can see here, it's 684,000 columns, which is a little bit large to render in QGIS. So what we'll do is we'll hit up here in Actions and go to Query Data. That will allow us to actually filter the data down a bit and pull just a sample of that data just for Manhattan only. Okay, so this is the view we get to when we want to filter our data, as you can see here. So as you can see, this is the complete data set. What we're going to do is actually filter that. What we're going to do is look at the borough, which is the text field here represented by the T. And we can see we're going to filter this by Manhattan. Now, if you scroll down here, you'll be able to hit Apply. And you'll actually see you get a much smaller set of results. So once you hit the export button up here, then you'll be able to actually download this just as CSV, which I know is not one of the formats we worked with, but we can actually input the latitude and longitude there. So I'm going to go ahead and hit download. That's going to download just the subsample of the data I want to look at here. And then I'm going to put that in my folder, and then we'll bump it back over to QGIS to take a look at it there. Okay, so as you can see here, I have my new 2015 tree census data here. What I want to do is actually open this up and as a new layer. So to do that, I'm going to actually want to input the latitude and longitude coordinate system into from the CSV into QGIS, so it renders the points in the right location. So to do that, I'll go up here and add layer and add vector layer. And you should see some of this pop up here. I did this once earlier, so some of these things are pre-inputted, but you can see I have my vector data set here. All you'd have to do is pick that and load it in from the folder system here. And then you'll see these options down here. Now you have a few different things that you can do for the formatting, if the file's formatted a specific way. Usually I leave these as default, But if you have something that you need to adjust, you can use that. So you have your different geometry columns. If you have a proper geometry in what's known as well-known text, it'll say something like point or polygon followed by a bunch of numeric values in parentheses. So if you have that, you could use that here, but all we have is latitude and longitude. So since we have the latitude and longitude column set up in our data, we can see that over here in the data set, we have latitude and longitude. We're actually gonna have to input those since it won't read the CSV natively as a geometry file like it would a shapefile or GeoJSON. So to do that, I actually can see here, here's my file layer. I want to go to layer and add layer this time and add vector layer. And then I want to put these values in. So we have latitude and longitude. The first one is going to be longitude for our X value, and the second one is going to be latitude. You want to make sure those are spelled correctly, otherwise it won't be able to find that data in the actual table itself. So I can go ahead and hit add here. Now the thing is, you won't see this on the map right away. As we see, there's no trees showing up or anything like that. So I'll just zoom to the layer and you're going to see it's probably showing up in the middle of the ocean here. It looks right from like the shape and everything, but the problem is that it's importing in the 3857 projection that you see down here, when in reality, the data is in the 4326 projection. So effectively, it hasn't been given that spatial projection information, so QGIS doesn't know what to do with it. That's an easy fix though. We can just right click here, hover over layer CRS, and turn that into 4326. Now the data should jump, and if we zoom to the layer correctly, we'll actually see that tree layer now showing up in the appropriate location. So we can see all that data here, which is great. Now, of course, you want to use the numeric data here. There is a stump diameter field within this data set that tells you how wide the tree is. One problem though, if we try to go here and click properties, go to the style and hit graduated, which is using the color schema based off of that data, we'll actually see no values showing up apart from latitude and longitude, which is not what we want to use. And the problem here is that we actually have to reformat the column type. It's written text and we want it to be a numeric value. So we actually have to jump over and do that in the processing toolbox. Now we'll cover the processing toolbox in greater detail, but this is one handy function if you have some data issues or anything like that to do. So I'll go over here and you're going to look for this refactor fields. You can use this text search up here. We'll go with refactor fields. You see that pop up here. And this will allow me to actually adjust the field data types. So I have my data loaded up here. So here's all my data. We're going to look for that stump diameter field. And you can see that it's a text string as it's listed here. All you have to do is open this and we want to turn that into a decimal. Now there's all these different numeric types. You have integers and then you have doubles or floats as they might be referred to, but basically that has some sort of decimal value after it. Since we don't know, we'll just use the decimal value here. And then that's effectively what we can do to change that. Now we can use this as a temporary layer. We're just going to load that in. We'll actually create a new layer for us, but that's all we want to do with this one. So once that's changed, you can go ahead and hit run. That's going to change that data over. Once that's complete, we'll jump back to the map here. And you can see we have another layer on the map. So we can remove this original layer for now. This is a temporary layer. It's basically just stored within the context of the map. If you actually want to export this, you can actually go here and hit export to save this as a proper file on your system. But for now, we can work with what we have here. Now I'm going to go in, I'm going to do the double click, go to graduated, and then now I can see that I have this stump diameter field that I can work with. So once we have this, we can now style the map based off of this stump diameter, which is the width of the tree across. Now, the first thing to do is take a look at some of the options. You can go off of color and size. For right now, we're just going to use color. And what I want to do is look at the color ramp. So there's a few pre-built options here, and then there's a lot more if you scan over here. So you can kind of choose one that you like. We'll use magma for now. And then the first thing we want to do is look at the mode. So there's equal count, equal interval, fixed interval, logarithmic scale. There's a lot of different methods to classify your data. You want to test these out to see what works well with your data. I'm going to use natural breaks for now. And then what it's going to do is actually classify that data. So you see I've defined 5 classes down here. Maybe I want to add more, like let's add 7. And then I want to hit classify and it'll reclassify that data for me. So if you want to see how this data breaks out sort of over like a histogram, you can see here that here's how the data sets break apart, and you can kind of get a sense of where those fall. So here's the colors, and you can kind of see that there's a ton of data bunched up here at the end. This data basically has a ton of 0 values in it, right? So you have all these values that basically weren't measured but are listed as 0 for some reason. So we'll take a look at what that looks like in a minute. For now, we can just go ahead and hit apply, and then we'll go back to the map. And like I said, you'll see all these dark circles here that are basically the points that they did not measure within the tree census. So I can just remove those for now by turning that part off. And then I'll just have the trees remaining that I want to see. So you can see here, there's a few different trees across the city, and we can kind of get a sense of, okay, these lighter yellow trees are much wider in diameter. The purple ones are much smaller. To see that a little bit better, maybe we can just increase the size of the point here. So I can go up here to symbol, and we'll just change that to let's make it a little bit bigger to 3. I'll hit OK, apply, and OK. And you can see here now we can start to see this a little bit better here. So this really depends on the data that you have, but just a few steps in terms of cleaning the data, changing data types that always really come in handy because you never know what form of data you're really going to get. So just a quick thing that you can use and check out there. So now let's say we want to actually change the size of the points based off of the stump diameter to get a better sense, smaller points being smaller diameter, bigger ones being larger, obviously. Let's go back here and we'll actually change this. We're going to change this from color to size. And you can see here that's actually going to change the size of the symbol. Let's have the smallest one be 2 and the largest one be 18, just to give a little bit of variance here. And then we can go ahead and hit apply on the map, and we'll hit OK. And you can start to see that we have changed that here as well. So we've removed all those 1 values that just basically have no data. Since this is representative of size, this is probably a better way to visualize the data at the end of the day. And there's a lot more that you can do with styling here. There's also zoom level based controls. So if you wanted a layer to turn on or off at a specific zoom, we can actually do some things like that. We can actually adjust our legend formatting here, so you can actually change these different types and add some different components. So there's so much that you can do. You can change opacity here, like we mentioned before. There's blending modes, drawing effects, and you can actually control how these points stack up on each other if you want to control them by the larger ones showing up on top, or in this case, maybe you want to do that on the stump diameter and basically showing ascending. We can start with the descending and going like that. So you can hit OK here, and that will just change how the maps and the points are rendered on the map. So this one has the larger ones on top, as you can see here. So there's all these options that you can really adjust within the view of your map and change. So there's so much you can do with styling here. I'll put some more resources down in the description where you can actually break this apart and see, oh, here's some things I can do with zoom-based styling or all these other components that you want to use. I'll just point a few of these quickly. If you want to create very specific custom rules, you can actually do that here. You'll create these like filter statements and things like that actually you can really customize and get kind of very specific on what you want to do. There's also like things that you can do like point displacement and point clustering and heat maps and all this different stuff that you can really play around with. So I recommend definitely working on the styles, checking out all those different options here. There's so much that you can do, even like doing embedded symbols and your custom libraries for Symbology. So there's really just kind of endless opportunities about how you can style the map. But at least for our basic tutorial, this will cover enough for what we wanted to scratch the surface of today. So if you want to view the tabular data associated with that, anytime you can open this up and hit open attribute table. There's a few things you can do here. Let's say you really want to see this specific tree here. You can do some filtering and see these different things. You can actually pan the map to those selected rows, so that will zoom in, and you can actually hit here to zoom to that specific feature, which will zoom all the way into the thing that you want to see. And then there's a few things if you need to edit or organize or do a field calculation here. This will allow you to edit some of that underlying data to actually adjust that. So there's all these things that you can kind of do with these different pieces here. So let's say for some reason I wanted to edit these values or change them, I can just open up and edit those in this tabular format as well. So let's say we want to add some labels to our map. We want to actually take a value of the data and actually put that as a label on the map. So what you can see here, once again, all I'm going to do is do this double click, open up the layer, and then click down here for the labels. There's a few different options. You'll start with no labels, but you can do rule-based labeling. You can handle how labels are blocking or overlapping. But for just a simple case, what we'll do here is we'll actually open this up, and we're going to base this off of this status column, which is actually the status. You can also do like the common species or thing like that. But let's just go with status for now. We'll use it'll provide a default font option. In this case, it's Open Sans here. Let's make this a little bit bigger. We can go up to 15, and maybe we want to change this to have a bolder text. So let's go with bold up here so it's a little bit easier to see. Once that's set up, and there's more options here, you can do like masking and formatting and adding different background components to these. Let's go ahead and hit apply and see OK. And now you can start to see on the map here that this is representing of this value. So if I click here, you can see that yes, the status is stump. And as I start to zoom the map in and out, you can start to see the other labels where they are applicable. Some will have them, some won't. As you zoom in, you can see those different labels depending on if the value has data or not. So that kind of covers the styling of the map. There's all these different things you can do. Of course, labeling and styling the maps and things like that. Lots of different options there. Let's go ahead and turn this layer off for now. And what we can also talk about is editing your vector data. So let's say I wanted to actually edit a polygon layer. And we'll just take a look at this example park here. As you can see, it goes all the way up and down this area. But let's say, I want to just adjust the boundary of it. You can see here, if I zoom all the way in, you have this very small area here that's not quite accurately captured, and you want it to be just perfect. So we're going to edit that layer. So what you want to do is actually select the layer you want to edit here. You can do this a few ways. You can open up toggle editing here by right-clicking and hitting toggle editing, or you can hit the pencil up here. Now there's a few options. This will allow you to save your options, cancel them, adjust them, do anything that you want to here. If you want to add a new feature, you can use that here to create a new polygon, which is not what we want to do in this case. For this feature, we want to actually adjust this polygon layer. So what I'm going to do, it gives you some of the options here. If you read down, right-click on an editable feature to show its table of vertices. You can adjust them here. It should show you also, as you click over it here, all the different things that you can do and all these different pieces. So let's go ahead and basically right-click here. We can open up the editing, and you see this plus icon. This will allow me to actually add a vertice. So what I can do here is now I'm dragging this and I'm putting it all the way over here, which is not ultimately what I wanted to do. You do have this like go back menu here to adjust that. Let's say we want to actually adjust this vertice here. This is the problematic one that we want to change. What we can do is actually go here and then change that. So I'm clicking on it. You'll see it'll allow me to drag that up. We can go here. If I click on it again, go back and snap it to that corner that I want. Now, if you don't want to keep any of these changes, you can just go back here, use your back button, or if you've done a bunch of changes and you don't want to do them, you can hit cancel for those layers as well. So let's just save our change here. We're happy with that here. What we can do is you can save for the selected layers, you can roll back, you can do all these options. Let's just go ahead and hit save for this layer. That'll actually update the base file that we're working off of. We have everything here, and we'll just toggle editing off so we know we're out of editing mode from this point forward. So we can't make any more changes or edits to the map here. So you can also create different pieces this way. It's very easy to draw vector geometries and shapes. Let's say you were trying to trace all these individual building polygons for some reason, or you have some imagery data of an area you want to trace. Very easy to do. You just open that up, start adding features to a layer, things like that. That makes it a little bit easier to do. Now, of course, when you're adding different features, you may want to create a whole new layer, and then it will actually ask you to prompt and put in some different fields for that different information. So we can go ahead and test that out. We'll go ahead and hit layer. We're going to create a new vector layer here. And you can see here, this opens this up. This allows me to create a file name. Let's go ahead and save this to our documents where we've been working before. And we'll just call this buildings. Go ahead and hit save. And then it will give you some options. You can keep adding columns here if you want to. You want to add some more, give it a new field name. So we'll just call this name. It'll be text. You can give it a length limit and things like that. And go ahead and add that to the field list here. So that looks good for now. We'll add a geometry type of polygon since we know it's going to be buildings. Here's our projection. All these different pieces allow us to get started really easy. So go ahead and hit OK. You're going to see that new layer hit up here. If you open the attribute table, you should see nothing, just the column names that we've already inputted. So let's just trace this building right here. What we're going to go ahead and do is effectively add a new shape. So we'll toggle editing and we'll hit add a new shape. And that'll allow me to actually start to trace this building. You can still zoom in and out as you see fit. I'll just start tracing it here. Get all these vertices. I won't be as perfect as I might be if I was doing something else, but this will give us enough to kind of go off of from here. So if I do need to pan this way, I'm just going to use my arrow keys to do that. Keep tracing, go get this as done fast and dirty as possible. go back over here so I can see what's going on. So once you're done, you just have to right click on the place where you want to end that, and you'll get this ID. This is basically allowing you to fill in. So we'll call this ID number 1, and the name is my building. Now, once you hit OK, you can see that this is a proper polygon layer on the map. I just want to close out of that. What you do, if you keep things active, you have to, edit them. You can also have curves and adjusting and digitizing the shapes. There's all this stuff you can do to like make these a little bit more accurate as you're filling them in. But this just gives you an idea. You can actually create your own data layer here. Now, as you see here, I'm just going to toggle this off. Go ahead and save for our selected layers. Our editing is off, and now we have this new building that we've created on the map, which is great. Now, let's say you want to print this map out. There's a lot of stuff you can do. Let's say we want to print this section here. What I'm going to go ahead and do is create a new print layout. And that's this button here. You can also get it from File and then create a new print layout here. So let's do that. We'll just call it New Print. And that will allow us to open up the map view here. So this is our page. You can adjust, obviously, the size of the page and things like that. But the first thing we want to do is basically add our map component to the map. So what we're going to do here is add a map. And then we're just going to drag and drop that where we want it to be. And that is going to actually render our map on this print layout. So you can see here, it's going to take a minute to render the map. And then that will see, here we go. Here we have our map. Now, there's a lot of other options you have here. You can export this as a SVG or a PDF if you want to edit that in like a vector editing program. It's like Adobe Illustrator or something like that gives you that option. You can also add some nodes and adjust these kind of sizes here. So if I want to drag it, make it a little bit bigger here, it's certainly easy to do. You can add a legend component here. So I'm just going to drag and drop that. Go ahead and add that. You can see, here's my legend of all the things that I had. You can add and remove these as you see fit. If you want to take those on and off, you can add a picture. You can build a 3D map. Let's add a nice little scale bar here. Just for reference, you can add a nice little north arrow to the map. That'll point us in the direction of north. So all this little stuff that you can add, I know this is incredibly ugly. You can add shapes and markers and a bunch of stuff here. And then when you're ready to print, you can actually, if you physically want to print this out, you can print that. And you can save this layout if you have to make multiple versions of this and you want to keep that consistent. That's another thing that you can do here is actually adding that. So we're not going to print this right now. We'll go ahead and close that out. But just in case you need to print some maps out, another great way for you to actually build and do that. So there's a lot more. I'll put some of those resources down below so you can see all the different things you can do when creating and editing geometries like forms and actions and so on and so forth. But let's jump into spatial analysis and doing some different spatial analytical problems that we want to actually take a look at. So we'll start with a few things, but the first thing I want to touch on is actually QGIS plugins. And you can start and take a look at the plugins menu here. That's right at the top, and click Manage and Install Plugins. So it's going to connect you to the official repository for all the different plugins that you have. And you can see there's some that are installed already here for at least my instance. And then you can see all of the ones that are installed. And there's so many that you can actually use and plug in. It's almost like a whole thing that you could go through and talk about all the amazing plugins. But it's basically like an extension of the different tools you can use within QGIS. And I think we already added one, which is the Quick Map Services. There's the Quick Map Services here. You can do Quick OSM, and they can actually grab in some OpenStreetMap data. So that's something we can check out here. So this webpage has some of the most downloaded plugins. You can see that there's some automatic or semi-automatic classifications. MMQGIS is this really simple analytics toolkit that I definitely recommend installing. There's QGIS to web, and we'll talk about a little bit that in a second. But all these different things, Google Earth Engine, digitizing tools, there's like so many. There's like maybe like 1,000 plus of these. So it's really impossible to go through all of them, in detail. But just to walk you through how to do those, let's add the QGIS to web right here. All you have to do is find that plugin, hit install plugin, and that'll go ahead and download that plugin for you to use. And you'll see if it installed successfully. You can see that there. You can see all the ones that you've installed here and check those out, which are sort of installed and not installed. And then that basically is how you walk through plugins. And we'll use some of those through, walking through the actual analysis steps here. So for our spatial analysis, let's ask the question of how many squirrels were seen near a play area or a playground. And that's these play area data set here. So what we can do with that is actually kind of go to a toolbox here. This is the processing toolbox where all the different analyses live. And you can see there's a ton here. There's things for cartographic options. You can work with GPS coordinates. There's spatial interpolations. There's a lot of stuff in here. But basically what we want to do is maybe we want to add a buffer. And you can see here that there's vector geometries. I should also mention that there's some different pieces from QGIS here to create buffers as well. So sometimes I use these. It really depends what you want to use here. But we'll just use the QGIS buffer option here. So what you want to do is double click that. You can select the layer that you want to use. We'll use play areas here. So you can see here, this is in 4326, and we're getting this distance in degrees, which is because of the projection that we're using. So to do and fix this, to get this in, let's say, meters, we actually want to change this projection here. So to change the projection, we can actually also use the toolbox. We'll type in projection here. You can see we have 3 project layers. So let's double click that. See, this is 4226. This will give you the options of the ones you want to choose. If you want to look at more, you can click the globe here. So we'll go to 3857. Let's go ahead and hit run, and this will add that new data to the map. You can see it's in this layer reprojected here. So let's go ahead and make sure we can see these green areas here, which is perfect. So now let's go back here and add our buffers. Go here, and you can see now we're getting this in meters, and we have all these other options here. So let's say we want to see, the number of squirrels, we want to figure out how many squirrels are within, let's say, 200 meters of each of these. Now you can choose the number of segments here, how these round caps and ending things like that. We'll just leave all those here for now. We'll go ahead and hit run, and now you see we have our buffered layer here. So we'll turn that off, and you can see all these parks have this little buffer around the polygons themselves, which is perfect. That's exactly what we want. So to do this, we want to actually count and do count points and polygons. We have our polygons here. We'll use our buffers, and our points layer is going to be our central park squirrels. You can add like a weighting here if you want to like count a sum of something or anything like that, or a class field. These are all optional, and it will output this num points option. So let's go ahead and run this analysis. And that's going to run. It's going to take a little bit of time to actually count all the points within each of these polygons. We'll jump back into this and show you the results of that as it comes in. Now, like I said, this is really just scratching the surface of all the things you can do with the analysis and the processing toolbox. So there's all these different things you can do. You can do a line to a point, you can find nearest neighbors, shortest line between features, you can do a distance matrix, there's clustering. I mean, the list goes on and on with all the things that you can actually do here with the spatial analysis and processing toolbox. So there's really just, it's endless, I have to say that, but I think one other cool thing that I want to point out is actually the model builder. So if you can go here, you can go into model designer, and you can actually access that here as well. You can create a new model. So let's walk through how we could create the same thing that we did previously with this model builder. So the first thing you want to do is create an input. There's lots of things you can put in here. You can put in a number or a single point. We'll choose a vector layer in this case. So you can choose that. And let's say we know that there is a polygon layer, and this is our buffers. And that will input that layer. We also have another vector layer of points. So we'll call that our points layer. And we know that that is going to be a point. Perfect. So let's go ahead and add those in here. Then we also want to go over to algorithms and do count points in polygons. So we should see that here. And we'll add in our polygons here. It should detect some of these, which is really great. Then you can go ahead and edit here. And you can see it just automatically detects this and allows you to see that. Now, when you go ahead and hit run, it will actually open the model and we'll have these inputs for you. So we know we have our buffered here and our points down here, and we can go ahead and run this. But you could add as many steps after this if you want. If you want to change the styles or do more analysis, this is just really easy, and I can just actually save this in my project. So we can enter a model name here. So it's great as I can just save my model. I can go ahead and put this in a model here and save it. And now I'm just can use this anytime over and over and over. So do something particularly complex, you can just build this out here and just keep running these over and over. I just love this. You can export this as a script and use this in QGIS Python if you choose to do it that way. It's just a great tool to run that analysis. So our original analysis is complete. We can see here we've counted all the points and polygons. Let's close this, and then we should be able to view our new layer here. And this has our count field. So let's go ahead and just quickly style this. We'll go with a graduated styling here. We're going to go with that num points value. Let's change this to a different one, classify it. As you can see here, there's a lot here that are kind of in different areas. So let's go with natural breaks, see what that looks like. Go ahead and hit apply and OK. And you can see here there are a few parks that have seen a lot of squirrels in them. The two down here at the southern end of the park, and the rest of them actually didn't because it's only in Central Park. So you can see here this kind of difference in terms of where these there's a lot of squirrels near a children's playground or something like that. So just a really cool spatial analysis, nothing too crazy out of the box, but really great. And we'll show you some other pieces. There's just so much you can actually do with the processing toolbox. So the next thing we want to get into is raster data. Now I'm going to turn off some of these layers for now. We can get rid of these and we're just going to want the park boundaries for the time being and show those here. So this is the park properties as we see, and we're actually going to import another layer into the map here. This is the 1 foot digital elevation model. So it's basically the raster cells are a single foot, and we're going to import that into QGIS. Now keep in mind, this is a really large data set, unzipped. You can see it's 3.5 gigabytes here. So this is not small. If you want to import that and you have the space, great. If not, no big deal. I'll see if I can post a clipped version of this so you can use that there. So I'm going to go ahead and download data. It's going to take some time, and then I'm going to put it in my folder here. So now you can see I have my DEM layer here. That's a digital elevation model. I'm going to add that in, and then you can actually kind of start to see some different things in the park here. You can see the reservoir up here. You can see the green, which is this relatively flat area, kind of where things like baseball are played and stuff like that. But what's interesting about Central Park, it has all these kind of rocks and elevation and changes in it. It's kind of preserved the original topology of Manhattan, which is actually quite rocky and had a lot of hills in it. So what we want to do is actually see, let's understand Central Park and some of how that changes in elevation and things like that. So that's what we're going to do. We want to actually clip this raster by another layer. So what I'm going to do here is actually pull up our park properties layer and move that up to the top, right on top of this. And you can see here we have our park properties. Now I'm going to basically just select the polygon for Central Park right now, which is the only one I care about. So to do that, I'm going to hit my select tool here. Oops. Now I have this selected. I'm just going to quickly export this as a new layer. So we'll save selected features as, we'll save it as a GeoJSON. We'll call it Central Park. We'll save that in our data layer here. So we'll put that in the same folder that we've been using. And we'll go ahead and hit save. And now we have just a layer for Central Park. So I'm going to turn this one off. So the next step we want to do is actually clip the raster by vector extent. So I think you can search for clip. And we're going to clip raster by mask layer here. So that's the one we're going to select. So you can see we have our Central Park mask layer here. We have our DEM here, and that's what we're going to do. So we're going to go ahead and hit run. That's going to basically clip and take the Central Park part of the raster out that we care about, and then we'll just have that and we can get rid of everything else for now. So that's going to run, it's going to take a minute, and then we'll actually just get that clipped raster back. So there's a ton of stuff you can actually do with raster data here. You can actually analyze that. You can get a bunch of different factors in and about this, reclassifying a layer, rounding, zonal statistics. If you want to do raster creation and create those values, you can understand terrain tools, which we'll get into in a minute. And then there's all these different pieces to move raster from, raster to vector and things like that. So we can convert a raster to a polygon. We can, actually turn that into vector data. So there's all this cool stuff that you can do. But as you can see here, we've loaded up our new raster, which is right here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and get rid of our original one so we can kind of see that on the map. And we get a much clearer view of kind of the elevation changes within the park here, which is pretty cool. So let's go ahead and do an analysis here. We're going to actually, let's do a hillshade and figure out what that looks like. So our elevation layer here is our clipped mask layer. You can do some different pieces here, and we'll go ahead and run that and see what we get back. So we'll do our hill shading to actually calculate what the terrain looks like here. So it's really simple. You just basically click that. And then now we have this beautiful kind of hill shaded layer here that you can kind of see the elevation of all these different pieces, which is very, very cool. You can see these flat areas where we have the other parts of the park. And then there's all these kind of little outcroppings and rocks and stuff like that. And since it's so accurate, you get these really accurate kind of pieces here. And you can do more with this if you want to smooth this or do some other things there to get a much more accurate view of what that looks like. But just really cool what you can do there. So another common use case you might have with raster data, specifically elevation data, is you might want to interpolate that and kind of figure out what that looks like in terms of like an elevation map or something like that. So that's a pretty common analysis that we want to do. What we're actually going to do is create these contours here, and we'll actually generate those from this raster layer here. So we have our input, we want our clipped mask again. Here's our gray layer. And we're going to go ahead and run this and get back that sort of contoured layer that shows the elevation kind of as a map like you would see on an elevation map or something like that. So let's let that run and see what we get back from that. As you can see, this is part of the processing toolkit, but actually in this GDAL folder here. There's other ones you can do: interpolation. You can do some sort of raster interpolation and things like that here. So there's a lot of this type of analysis that you can do. And you see here we get this map back that kind of shows us where those different pieces are. So let's take a look at what we have here. We have our contours for the elevation. We can go ahead and let's make these a little bit bigger so we can see them. And then what we want to do is style that by these like breakpoints that it's given us. So we'll get the elevation here. Let's do a different color schema here. We'll classify that and then hit apply. So you can see here, these darker areas are where there are sort of larger higher elevations, I should say. And then we can kind of pan around and see what's going on here. So we have all this different stuff that's happening. You can see where these higher points are as we get into some of these different areas, or where some of the lower points are. So we get like a higher part up here and a lower part down here in the park, which is really cool. And we can just turn off that raster layer and we can see that on top of the map. So let's just turn off the layers we don't need for now. And then you can see the elevation on top of the base map here, which is pretty cool. I think you can see where these different elevation changes are within Central Park. So let's do one other raster analysis. We'll go back here and we'll go into our raster terrain tools, and let's do a shaded relief map. I really like these. These look really cool. So we'll pick our elevation layer here. We'll go with our clip layer again. Now this one's going to take some time to actually spit out. So I'm going to let this run and then we'll jump back into the video once this one's complete. So if you're following along, this one might take a little bit, but just keep that in mind. Okay, and here is our shaded relief map. I kind of picked the coloring on its own so it could kind of choose what colors it wanted to use and sort of the breakpoints. But you can see here is that it just gives you this really cool sense of like the topology of the park and where the lakes are and things like that. So it just gives us this really awesome view of what Central Park can look like. And you can see up here, especially as we get to the north towards Harlem, you get these big hills, these little kind of valleys, and then the pond up here. So it just gives you this whole sense of like, this sort of mountainous terrain in Central Park, even though the elevation goes from, like maybe like 100-foot change or something like that. But it just gives you a nice cool view of what you can look at here from the raster side. So much you can do with raster analytics. There's even things like classification that you can have in here to classify raster results. Tons of plugins you can do here. So there's just so much that you can really start to play around with here that gives you a full sense of what you can do with raster analysis plus vector data here. You can enrich your vector data with raster data, extrapolate values. Let's say you have a point and you want to see the elevation of that point. You can use these two layers to get that information. So just another really cool thing. There's so much you can do here. I'm not going to be able to get in all of that either, but just another really great thing you can do with QGIS. Okay, so in this last tutorial, we're going to walk through one other really awesome part of QGIS that I want to highlight, which is the network analysis tools. Now, this allows you to bring in a network, whether that be streets, or in our case, the bike path data, and actually do some network analysis with that. So let's go ahead and get that started here. Within the processing toolkit, you can see the network analysis here. We'll go ahead and open that up, and you'll see we want to do some things with shortest path. We'll go from from point to layer, which basically allows us to create a network grid from our bikes data, and then map that for a variety of points to figure out from center to destination and things like that. So there's a bunch of other things you can do here, like service area and things like that. But for our purposes, we're going to go ahead and just add a few points and create the bike routes from that. So the first thing we need to do is create a new layer. So we'll go ahead and add a vector layer here. Oops. So the first thing we need to do is create a layer. To do that, we'll go in here, we'll go add layer, actually create layer, and then add a new shapefile layer. So what we want to do is we want to make sure we give that a file name here. We'll save that in our tutorial. We'll go bike points, go ahead and hit save. The geometry type, of course, is point, and we just need an ID since we'll only do a few things here. So let's go ahead and create this layer. We have that now, and then let's just pick a few points here on the map. So we'll pick, let's go ahead. So now if you remember how we create geometries, we just need to create a few points on the map. We'll toggle our editing pencil here, and then we'll add a few points here to click on the map. So let's add one way downtown here. Let's give that an ID of 1. We'll add one uptown here, give it an ID of 2. And let's add one more on the east side here. We'll add that an ID of 3. All right, so now that we added our points, let's toggle and save our editing, turn editing off, and then we'll click into the network tools here. So we're gonna go from shortest path from point to layer. Go ahead and click that, and this is the layer representing our network. So that's what we want to be our New York City bike routes. We'll click that here. Now the path type, you can click shortest or fastest. There's a few other parameters that you can put in here, basically showing, the direction field, if there's a direction, like a one-way or anything like that. Some of these do have that, but we won't mess with that for now. And then you can actually add, some of the default speeds. You could add a field here for saying, what the speed would be. All of this different stuff that you can put in. So you can really, make that a lot more advanced, but for our purposes, we'll just show the routes as they pop up. So we have our bike points, which is the ending points where the route is going to end up, and we're going to imagine that they all start from the same point. So to do this, all we need to do is click on the map to get a starting point. So let's just put that over here, right by Penn Station, and you'll see that pops up, that gets the bright point there. So all we have to do now is go ahead and click run. So we'll run this. It's going to load the points, build the graph, and then actually calculate the routes. So it's going to add a layer for each route. And as you see here, it did that. Go ahead and hit close. And then we have our shortest path here. Now we can't see it, so let's just make it a little bit bigger so we can actually see what's going on here. And we'll hit apply and OK. And as you can see, it has our starting point here, and then it calculated the best bike route from each location. So you can see here's the safest way to ride from a bicycle across to each of these locations, which is really pretty cool. I mean, you can do this with roads if you have road data or anything like that. Pretty easy to put that together, so you can just kind of get started and play around with this here. So that gives you a sense of how to do some pretty basic network analysis. If you need to scale this up, you might want to add something like PG routing and PostGIS. Of course, remember that you can connect Postgres and PostGIS here. Here's some of my different routing tools. I actually have a routing one from Bike here for the bike routes in New York City. That's one that I built in my book, Spatial SQL, over there. So if you want to check that out and do some more advanced stuff, there's a lot of things that you can do there, along with QGIS and PostGIS together. Okay, so let's say that we want to create an actual web map from this. Okay, so let's go ahead and export our map to a web map. We can go ahead and click up here. As you can see, that will open this up. We're just going to upload. So for right now, we're just going to export this point layer of our trees that we have. We can add in clusters and pop-up fields and all this different stuff here. So you can see the different options you get for each layer. You can change your appearance here if you want to add these different pieces in. You can do a geolocate user piece, so we can turn that on. All these different options that you have. So you can kind of play around with those. Make sure to pick your export location. So we're going to go and do our documents. We're going to put that in our QGIS tutorial and hit open there. And that will go to that specific folder. And then what we can do ahead is you can hit preview here, or you can hit export. Now, if you want to use open layers or leaflet, that's your choice at the bottom. But we'll go ahead and hit export. We'll let that run, and then we should get our complete HTML folder in our folder location, and we can check that out after that wraps up. Okay, so as you can see here, I have my new map that I've exported. You see you have all your files here with your data. We have our So you have all your folders here, your JavaScript, your CSS, your images, all those different things. Let's go ahead and open up our HTML file here and see what our exported web map from QGIS looks like. Okay, and here we go. As you can see, here is our nice little web map. I have my geolocation. I can zoom in and out, and I can go into my clusters here and see the actual points on the map. So let's go in and see if we can get to an individual tree location. Zoom all the way in. And you see here, it just looks just like our map that we created. And you can click here and get the pop-up that gives us all that data here. Of course, you can format this and play around with it a little bit. But yeah, I mean, it's a basically fully functioning web map. If I dump this into a storage bucket or something like that, this would be there, and I could ready to share this online just as it is. So pretty cool. I can take something from QGIS, dump it to the web. There's new functionality out with new tools like Felt and other mapping programs that you can actually take that data out and put it into a hosted service like that. So there's so many different options here to create this, but this is just another cool feature to take your project from QGIS, put it online, host it, and go from there. So just another really cool feature that you can play around with. So that wraps up this introductory tutorial to QGIS. There's so much more that we couldn't cover in this tutorial. There's things like the QGIS server to serve web map layers. You can actually do more complex analysis with this toolkit. You can integrate databases like PostGIS and others. So really just scratching the surface of what you can do here. There's a lot of other resources down in the description. So if you want to check those out, go ahead and see everything that we have down there. So that's it. I hope you learned something new, picked up some new skills, and can apply this to whatever work that you're doing out in the field. So appreciate you sticking around this long. So if you like this video, go ahead and hit subscribe or like. That always helps with the algorithm to help more people find these videos. So really appreciate it, and we'll see you next time.